Kyle had never been this far from Earth before. He stood at the edge of the alien outpost, his boots sinking slightly into the soft purple ground. The air smelled strange, sweet and dry like metal flowers. He adjusted his backpack and looked around, expecting someone to greet him, but no one came. His mission was simple, or so he thought: fix the power core, update the software, and return home. But things never go as planned in deep space. A quiet hum echoed across the landing bay. As the outpost doors opened, out stepped a tall figure, elegant and slow. She had silver skin with soft patterns like flowing water. Her long hair shimmered like light caught in a glass. She wasn't wearing armor, just a loose robe that moved like smoke. Kyle blinked, surprised. He hadn't expected someone so beautiful. "I am Sylra," she said, her voice smooth but distant. "You are the human engineer, yes?" Kyle nodded and smiled, trying not to stare. "Yes, Kyle Morgan," he replied. "Just here to help." She turned without another word and walked inside. He followed her through long halls filled with strange lights and soft music. Alien symbols glowed on the walls like breathing tattoos. It was quiet, too quiet. No one else seemed to live here. "Are you the only one here?" he asked, trying to break the silence. "Yes," Sylra answered flatly. "The others left weeks ago." Kyle frowned. That wasn't in his briefing. But he didn't press further. The base was cold, almost lifeless, and he felt her eyes watching him from time to time. She showed him to the reactor room and left without saying anything else. He set down his tools and got to work. The tech was old, wires tangled, and lights flickering. Sweat formed on his forehead as he crawled into a narrow gap under the control panel. He didn't notice the soft sound of footsteps returning. Sylra stood at the door, silently staring, her eyes locked onto Kyle's exposed neck. Beads of sweat rolled down his skin, catching the dim blue light. Something shifted inside her chest: warmth, confusion, a pull she didn't understand. She gripped the wall for balance, her breath shallow, her heart, or whatever organ she had that pulsed with life, sped up. Kyle slid out from under the console. Wiping his brow with his arm, he looked up and jumped slightly. "Oh, didn't hear you come in," he said with a nervous laugh. She didn't answer, just looked at him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Her body felt strange, a low warmth building in her spine, rising to her throat. "I fixed the coolant link," Kyle said, standing up. Sylra took a step back, her hands tightening at her sides. "Good," she whispered, then turned and walked away quickly. Kyle tilted his head, confused. Had he said something wrong? In her private chamber, Sylra locked the door and fell to her knees. Her fingers touched her lips, her chest rising and falling rapidly. What was that scent? She whispered to herself. Why does it make me feel like this? She opened a scanner and spoke into it. Analyze air sample from reactor room. A few moments passed before the machine answered. Foreign organic trace, detected human perspiration. Sylra's hands trembled. It was just sweat, wasn't it? But something deep inside her had responded. A dormant instinct, ancient and forbidden. Her body had already started to change just slightly, but enough for her to notice. Her reflection in the mirror looked different. Lips fuller, skin softer. Even the color of her eyes had brightened. She gasped and backed away. This can't be, she muttered. No. This only happens during heat. But not with humans. Outside, Kyle sat in the hallway, checking his gear. He wondered why Sylra had looked so pale when she left. Maybe she was sick or stressed. He didn't know her species well, and he wasn't. About to ask personal questions still. Something about her eyes when she looked at him made him feel exposed, like she saw more than just his face. Back in her room, Sylra curled up on her bed. Her hands clutched the sheets tightly. She could still smell him, his skin, his heat, his sweat, and now, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop the burning feeling growing inside her. Something ancient had awakened, and it wanted more. Sylra couldn't sleep. The room was quiet, but her thoughts were loud. Her body felt too warm, her skin too soft, and her breath kept catching in her throat. She turned from side to side on the bed, but nothing helped. All she could think about was the human Kyle, and the scent that still lingered in the air. She pressed her hand over her chest, feeling the strange rhythm beneath her skin. Her body had started changing, faster than it should. She wasn't supposed to feel this way, not for anyone, and definitely not for a human. But her mind kept replaying the moment she saw his sweat roll down his neck, the way he wiped it with his arm, how the scent had filled the room like fire. Syra rose from the bed and went to the mirror again. Her eyes widened. Her reflection had changed even more than before. Her hips had grown slightly fuller. Her chest had lifted in a way that her kind usually hid. Her lips were rounder now. Her voice had softened without her trying. The heat was real, and it was growing. Her body was preparing for something her mind didn't want to admit. She called her AI assistant with a sharp whisper, "Run full bioscan." The light scanned over her body, and the result appeared on the screen. Confirmed. Phase 1 heat response triggered. She stared at the words, her hands trembling. "But why now?" She whispered, "There's no compatible male here." The AI paused before replying. "Genetic match detected. Human male, Earth origin." Syra gasped and stepped back. "That's not possible," she said, her voice shaking. "Our species doesn't respond to theirs." But her body told a different story. Meanwhile, Kyle sat alone in the engine room, tightening bolts and wiping oil from his hands. He looked around, expecting Syra to check on him again, but she hadn't returned. Since earlier, he wondered if she was okay. She had looked pale and shaky when she left. He thought about going to her room and asking, but he didn't want to intrude. As he leaned back against the wall, he felt the sweat on his back and neck. The air was getting warmer down here. He removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. He didn't know that every drop of his sweat was driving Syra deeper into something she couldn't control. Behind the vents, Syra watched him again. She had found a hidden path through the walls, silent and dark. Her eyes glowed faintly as she stared at him. She didn't know why she was watching, only that she couldn't stop. Every move he made stirred something inside her. His hands, his skin. The heat rising from his body, it was like gravity pulling her closer. She bit her lip, holding back a sound she didn't recognize. Something between a sigh and a whimper. She was burning inside, but not with sickness. It was need. Her people never talked about this. Heat was something secret, something hidden, but now it was real, and it had a face, a human face. Kyle suddenly looked around. Sensing something, he stood and walked toward the air vent. "Hello?" he called. Syra froze in the shadows, her breath caught. For a moment, their eyes met through the grate, just a flash. Then she vanished into the darkness, her heart racing. Kyle scratched his head, confused. He thought maybe he imagined it. Maybe he was just tired, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, something warm and close and almost trembling. Syra returned to her room and locked the door again. She fell to the floor, breathing hard, her body shaking. She could still smell him, even now. She touched her lips again and whispered to herself, "What is happening to me?" Her skin was glowing softly now, her hair even longer. The heat had entered phase 2, and she knew there was no going back. The more she avoided him, the worse it got. But if she got closer, she was afraid of what she might do, or what she might become. She curled up, hugging herself tight. Her last thought before sleep took her was not of duty or control. It was of Kyle's voice, and the way her name sounded when he said it, like she was something gentle, like she mattered. The next morning, Syra did not leave her room. Kyle noticed right away. He waited near the control deck for her to appear like before, but she never came. He called her name once, softly, then louder, but there was no reply. He wasn't sure if he should go to her door or just wait. After all, she was his host. Maybe this was normal for her kind, but something about her silence felt wrong. He sat on the steps near the hallway, his hand resting on his tool bag. He had more systems to repair, but his mind stayed on Sylra. Her last look had been strange, not angry or cold, but scared, not of him, but maybe of herself. He remembered how she stared at him. The way her skin shimmered, it wasn't just alien, it was personal, inside her room. Sylra sat in the darkest corner, her back against the wall. She hadn't eaten or moved much since last night. The heat inside her was worse now. Her fingers trembled as she gripped her own arms, trying to calm the storm building beneath her skin. She had tried everything: meditation, cold showers, silence, but none of it worked. The moment she thought of Kyle, her body reacted. The changes were becoming visible even to herself now. Her body had always been built for silence, for control, but now it was shifting without permission. Her curves were sharper, her voice softer, her skin warm to the touch. Her robes didn't fit the same way they used to, and worst of all, her thoughts were no longer clean. She saw Kyle in every corner of her mind, the way he smiled, the way he laughed softly when confused, the way he wiped sweat from his neck. She stood slowly and walked toward the mirror. Her reflection felt like a stranger. She touched her face, her lips, her chest. She whispered, "Why are you doing this to me?" But the mirror gave no answer, only the truth. She was in full heat, and it was because of him, and she didn't know how much longer she could hide it. Outside, Kyle finally gathered the courage to approach her door. He knocked twice, gentle but firm. "Sylra?" he called. "Are you okay? You didn't come out all day." Silence followed. He turned to leave, but then he heard something, barely a whisper. "Don't come in," she said, her voice shaky. "I'm not myself right now." Kyle paused, confused. "You're sick? Do you need help?" "No," she answered quickly, almost in pain. "It's not a sickness. It's something else." Kyle didn't know what to do. He stood outside her door for a long time, unsure whether to press or leave her alone. He finally said, "If you need anything, just say so, okay?" Then walked back slowly, glancing over his shoulder. Behind the door, Sylra sat down again, her breath heavy. Her body felt like fire inside, but her mind was cold with fear. She had heard stories long ago of females who lost control during heat, of those who reacted to forbiddens partners. None of those stories ended well, but none of those stories involved humans. She opened the small panel on the wall and spoke to her AI. "Run cross-species bonding records." "None found," the AI replied. "Run scent compatibility." "Match confirmed. Human male. Scent triggers mating response." Sylra closed her eyes, trying not to cry. She was not meant for this. She was trained for duty, for silence, not desire, not weakness. And yet every time she remembered his warmth, her hands curled into fists, not in anger, but in need. That night, Kyle couldn't sleep either. He kept wondering what was going on behind that door. What did she mean by not herself? Was she turning into something else? He had heard about alien life cycles, transformations, but nothing like this. Something about the way she looked at him made it feel personal. Too personal, like she was holding back something powerful. Something that might break loose any second. He walked into the hallway and stared at her door again. He didn't knock this time, just stood there quietly. Then suddenly, the door cracked open a little. Not all the way, just enough for him to see a single glowing eye looking at him through the shadow. He didn't speak, neither did she. They just stood there, breathing the same quiet air. Then the door slowly closed again. Kyle turned away, but his heart beat faster. Something inside him whispered that Sylra's struggle wasn't just physical. Something was changing between them. Something that wasn't supposed to happen, and neither of them knew how to stop it. Kyle couldn't stop thinking about her eye, the way it looked at him through the narrow door, half glowing, half trembling, stayed in his mind. It wasn't just curiosity or fear in that look. There was something deeper, something personal. He didn't understand it yet, but it pulled at his chest like invisible hands. He wanted to help her, but he didn't know what she was going through. The next day, she finally appeared again. Her steps were slower, her robes heavier, as if hiding a secret beneath them. She stood across the room and didn't come close, but Kyle noticed everything. Her voice had changed. It was softer now, almost musical. Her face looked warmer, not as sharp or cold as before. And her eyes didn't just watch him now. They followed him, every movement, every breath. Syra asked strange questions. What does it feel like when humans get close to someone? Why do they sweat more when they're nervous? What makes the heart race in your kind? Kyle answered each. One with patience, even though he found them oddly personal. He even laughed a little when she asked about scent. Humans don't really notice scent like that, he said with a shrug. But yeah, I guess it means something if you like the way someone smells. Syra went quiet after that. She looked down, her fingers twitching. Her heart was thumping fast and loud in her ears. He didn't know that every word he said only made her heat worse. Not just her body, but her mind was burning now. She had never wanted anything this much before, and yet she was afraid of it. Afraid of herself, Kyle continued his work that afternoon. He had to climb high into the cooling tower. The sun over the alien world was strong. Sweat poured down his neck, soaking the back of his shirt. His arms glistened in the light. Syra saw him from the hallway and froze. She gripped the wall, her breathing suddenly hard. Her body reacted before she could stop it. Her spine shivered, her skin flushed, and her eyes dilated. She tried to look away, but something inside her refused. Every drop of sweat that rolled down Kyle's neck felt like a signal, like a voice calling her closer. Her chest ached with pressure she couldn't release. She had to leave the hallway before she did. Something she couldn't undo. She returned to her room and locked the door. She paced in circles, pulling at her robe, trying to cool herself down. But the memory of Kyle's scent was stuck in her brain like a fire that wouldn't die. She whispered to the AI, asking if this would stop on its own. Negative, it said calmly. Heat will escalate unless bonded. Syra sat on the floor, holding her head. No, she said through clenched teeth. He doesn't even know what I am. He doesn't understand. But the voice in her heart was louder than logic. It told her she needed him, not just to touch, not just to ease the fire, but to survive it. That night, something inside her broke. Not in pain, but surrender. She rose slowly and walked out of her room without her robe. Her body had finished changing. Every part of her had adapted to what it wanted most. Her curves were fuller, her steps silent but urgent. She moved like a shadow, smooth and determined. Kyle sat alone in the living space, sipping from a metal cup. He looked up when he heard footsteps and nearly dropped the drink. Syra stood in the doorway, bathed in soft blue light. She looked different, too different. Her hair flowed like silk, her figure had changed, and her eyes glowed with something wild. But her face looked vulnerable. He stood slowly, unsure. Syra? He said quietly. She didn't answer right away. She walked forward until they were only a breath apart. Then she whispered, "Why do I feel this around you?" Kyle's voice caught in his throat. He didn't know what to say. Syra's fingers touched his hand, barely a brush. Even that contact sent waves through her body. She shivered and pulled back quickly. "I'm sorry," she said, voice cracking. "I shouldn't. I'm not in control." Kyle looked at her, heart pounding. "You're not sick, are you?" Syra laughed once, broken and bitter. "No, not sick," she said. "Just changing." She turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Kyle standing there with 100 questions and one single truth. Something between them had already begun, and neither of them could stop it now. The next day brought danger, not from inside Syra, but from the skies above. An alarm screamed through the outpost loud and sharp. Kyle jumped from his seat, tools falling to the floor. He ran to the main screen and saw red dots approaching. Fast, unknown ships, fast and armed, closing in on their position. His heart pounded, not just from fear, but from worry. Where was Syra, and was she ready for this? He tried to contact her through the speaker, but there was no reply. Instead, the power flickered, and half the lights shut down. The backup systems weren't stable, and the shields were weakening. Kyle grabbed his toolkit and sprinted toward the core chamber. But just before he reached the door, he saw her. Syra stood at the end of the hallway. But she looked different again. Her skin was brighter, her eyes sharper, and her body looked like it was glowing from the inside. She wore armor now, but it was tight across her new form, made for someone lean and still someone who hadn't changed, but she didn't care. She moved fast, almost floating. Kyle tried to speak, but she was already gone. The attack had started, and the ground shook as explosions echoed nearby. Syra activated the outer defense systems with shaking hands. She fought through the burning heat still crawling under her skin. Every step was pain, every motion heavy. But she wouldn't let Kyle face this alone. Her instincts told her to stay hidden, to cool down, but her heart screamed louder. Kyle was in danger, and nothing else mattered. She grabbed a plasma rifle and stormed outside. Kyle worked hard inside the main power room, trying to bring the shields back online. He didn't know Syra was already outside, facing the attackers by herself. 3 enemy drones hovered above the base, firing sharp bursts of energy. Syra ducked, rolled, and returned fire, her hands trembling from heat and effort. Her body wasn't made for this in her current state, but her will pushed her beyond limits. One of the drones exploded in the air, raining sparks over the walls. Syra stood beneath it, chest rising fast, breath shaking, her vision blurred slightly. Not from the fight, but from the fire inside her. She dropped to one knee, her rifle slipping from her hands. Her heat had reached its breaking point. She couldn't cool down anymore. Her system was collapsing. Kyle finished the final override and rushed back toward the surface. He heard a blast and then silence. His heart dropped as he ran through the door and found her lying in the dust. He didn't think, didn't speak, he just ran to her and dropped beside her. Her skin was too hot to touch. Her eyes fluttered open slowly. She looked at him with pain and hunger, not for food, not for water, but for relief, for him. Her fingers brushed his chest, feeling the sweat through his torn shirt. A sound escaped her lips. Low and desperate, Kyle leaned close, afraid and confused. "What do I do?" he asked. Her voice was weak, barely there. "You're sent. It makes it worse, but also better. Please." He pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her, not knowing what else to do. He could feel the heat rising from her skin, almost burning. And yet her eyes looked at him not with pain, but with trust. She wasn't afraid of him. Even now, he lifted her carefully in his arms and carried her back inside. Each step felt heavy, not from her weight, but from what was happening between them. Her body curled into his, like it belonged there. Her breath was hot against his neck. He didn't speak, afraid his voice might break the silence holding them together. In the safety of the chamber, he laid her on a resting bed. She reached up and held his wrist, not letting go. "Don't leave," she whispered. He didn't. He sat beside her, wiping the sweat from his own forehead. Syra's eyes followed the motion like it was the only thing in the universe. Her body trembled, but now it was calming. His presence was working, slowing the heat, easing the pressure. Kyle didn't understand how or why, but something told him that his scent, his body, was tied to her survival, not by force, not by biology alone, but by something deeper. She closed her eyes, holding his hand tighter. And for the first time since arriving at the outpost, Kyle didn't feel like a visitor. He felt like he belonged. Syra didn't move for hours. She lay still on the bed, her skin glowing faintly, her breath soft but steady. Kyle sat beside her, the whole time, afraid that if he left, something bad would happen again. He didn't understand her condition, but he knew something had changed. Not just in her body, but in the air between them. She finally opened her eyes slowly, her gaze falling on him. "You stayed," she whispered. "Of course I did," he replied gently. Her hand moved toward his arm, fingers barely touching his skin. Even that small contact made her shiver. But she didn't pull away. "I thought I could control it," she said quietly. "This heat, it's not normal." Kyle leaned closer, his voice calm. Is it because of me? Sylara hesitated, then nodded once. Yes. Your scent started it. But now it's more than that. She looked down, ashamed. I didn't want this. But my body chose for me. Kyle reached out and placed his hand over hers. You don't have to explain, he said. Just tell me what you need. Sylara took a deep breath. I need to complete the bond. Or I'll stay in this state forever. Kyle blinked, unsure what that meant. But she looked at him like it wasn't just about survival. It was about something deeper, something unspoken. Before he could ask more, a soft sound echoed through the hallway. Footsteps, multiple footsteps. Sylara sat up quickly, her eyes wide with alarm. They came, she whispered. Who? Kyle asked, confused. She stood on shaky legs, reaching for a panel on the wall. The others. My kind, they felt it. The screen lit up with images of tall, elegant figures entering the outpost. 3 females and 2 males, their expressions cold and unreadable. They were here for Sylara, and they knew what was happening. They'll take me back, she said, her voice tight. They'll say I've broken the law. Kyle stepped in front of her. Why? You didn't do anything wrong. She looked into his eyes. In our culture, bonding with an outsider is forbidden. It's shameful. He clenched his fists. That's not fair. Sylara gave him a soft, sad smile. Fair doesn't matter to them. The door slid open, and the others stepped in. Their eyes scanned the room and landed on Sylara first. One of the males stepped forward, his voice sharp. You are in heat, Sylara. And you have not returned. Another added. Your transformation is complete. Yet you did not bond with your own. Sylara stood straight, her voice steady now. I didn't choose this. The female leader stepped forward and glanced at Kyle. You allowed a human to trigger it? Sylara didn't answer, but the silence was enough. They looked at Kyle with disgust. He must be removed, one of them said. No, Sylara said quickly. The tension in the room grew thick. Kyle didn't back away, even as they stepped closer. He stood beside Sylara, not moving. She chose me, he said, voice calm but strong. I didn't force it. She chose. The room fell silent. The leader stared at Sylara for a long time. Finally she spoke. Then let her finish it. If you are truly the bond she needs, it will complete. Or she will die. They turned and left without another word. The door closed, and silence returned. Sylara turned to Kyle, her face pale. They gave us no choice now. He stepped closer, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Then we face it together. Her hands reached out slowly, trembling. She touched his chest, resting her head against him. His scent was stronger now, so close, so real. Her body relaxed for the first time in days. The bond had already begun. Now it was only a matter of time before it locked forever. And once it did, there would be no going back. Sylara stood in front of him, her fingers still resting against his chest. The room felt like it had stopped moving. Even the machines in the walls had gone quiet. Outside, the stars blinked through the windows, as if watching silently. Her breathing slowed, her eyes locked onto his. This was the final moment, the point where everything would change. Her body had finished its transformation. Every part of her had been reshaped by instinct, built for connection, for closeness. But it wasn't just biology anymore. It was something more, something deeper. Kyle took her hands gently, not pulling her, not forcing. He let her decide. He didn't fully understand her world, her culture, or the rules that now hung over them like a dark cloud. But he knew one thing: he wanted to be with her. Not because she needed it, but because he did too. Sylara stepped closer, every nerve in. Her body sparked as their skin touched. His scent filled her mind, calm and strong. Her heat, once wild and painful, now melted into something softer. It no longer hurt it called to her gently, inviting her to bond, not out of fear, but choice. She leaned her forehead against his, her voice barely a whisper. I'm ready. The bond didn't explode with light. There was no dramatic blast. Instead, a warm hum passed between their bodies. like a string connecting their hearts. Slow and steady, her glow dimmed, then settled. The fever broke. Her body stopped trembling. She was whole again. Because of him. Kyle opened his eyes, not knowing what to expect, but she was smiling now. Truly smiling, no fear, no pain, only peace. They sat together for a long time saying nothing. Words weren't needed. The connection between them spoke louder than sound. It was done. Hours later, the alien elders returned. They entered quietly and looked at Sylra. She stood proudly beside Kyle. Her body no longer glowing, her heat fully passed. The leader narrowed her eyes. "You survived," she said flatly. Sylra nodded. "Yes." "And I bonded by choice." There was a long silence. Then the leader turned to Kyle. "You have changed one of ours." "This has never happened before." Kyle didn't flinch. "I didn't plan to," he said. "But I stayed when she needed me." The elders didn't speak for a moment. Then they stepped back. "Then it is done," the leader said. "You are now part of her path. And hers of yours." They left again, without a fight. Sylra turned to him slowly. "Do you know what this means?" Kyle smiled. "I think I do. Forever," she whispered. He nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." Weeks passed. The outpost returned to silence. But it felt different now, brighter, warmer. Kyle and Sylra worked side by side, no longer as strangers, but as something more. She still watched him sometimes when he worked, still smiled when he wiped sweat from his forehead, and he, in return, couldn't stop looking at her when she walked past. Now graceful and confident in her new form, she no longer hid her voice or her body. She had been reborn not through shame or fear, but through the choice to feel, to bond, to love, and all it took was one human, one scent, one heartbeat shared between two very different souls.